Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Lauren, you may also call me Lo, and today I'm bringing you my September wrap-up, or all of the books that I read in September. So thank you so much for being here. I hope you're doing well, and let's get on into it. Starting with my usual stats, in September I read 8 books and 1 short story, for a total of 2,932 pages. And of those pages, 1,633 pages were from listening to audiobooks, and 1,299 pages were from physically reading. The average book length was 326 pages. Of these books, 2 were YA and 7 were adult, and 2 were thrillers, 2 were horrors, 2 were contemporaries, 1 was a romance, 1 was a historical fiction, and 1 was a sci-fi. When it comes to ratings, things are a little bit more complicated than usual because the short story I read and 2 of the books that I read are featured in an upcoming vlog, so I don't want to give you my opinions about them or talk about them super extensively so that vlog is still enjoyable to watch. So that leaves 6 books that I'm going to be rating in this video. And I gave 2 of those books 3 stars and 4 of those books 4 stars, for an average of 3.67 stars. So that means that I read a lot of 4-star books this month, which is really great. I actually rated like the first several books that I read 4 stars, and I was kind of like, is this my default now? Am I just a 4-star rater? But truthfully, I really enjoyed a lot of these books. I would recommend pretty much every single book that I'm going to talk about. 3 and 4 stars generally are books that I still recommend. 3 stars being books that I recommend to fewer people than 4 stars. 4 stars I recommend to pretty much everyone. So it was a good reading month, although I didn't have any 5 stars, but I also didn't have any 2 stars. So I'll take what I can get. With all of that out of the way, let's get into the books. So the first book that I read in September was Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. This is an adult sci-fi that takes place in a future in which parents can buy their children AFs, or artificial friends, which are basically AI robots, sort of, that are companions for children. And we are following one such AF named Clara, and we follow her as she's sitting in this AF store waiting to be bought, waiting to be accepted into a family or into a child's life. And then we follow her as she is adopted and kind of the aftermath of that. I don't feel like I can really summarize it more than that without spoiling it, but this book was really, really interesting to read because it's not unlike a book that's narrated by a child. The book that I'm thinking of is Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close by Jonathan Safran Foer, which is one of my favorite books that is narrated by, I want to say, a 9-year-old child. And this was similar in the way that the main character didn't quite understand everything that was going on. And so as the reader, you're kind of like, okay, this is what Clara thinks is happening, but what is actually happening? And that kind of lent an unreliable aspect to Clara. But another thing that's interesting is that because Clara is a robot, she doesn't quite understand human interactions and human emotions. And it's kind of you kind of get an analysis of humans from the perspective of an AI, which is really fascinating to read. There are some insights where you're like, oh, you're kind of right, Clara. You're kind of right. So ultimately, I did really enjoy this. The beginning of it was quite slow. It took me a while to get through the first, I want to say, third of it before it really picked up. But I think that kind of slow start made the end of the book and the middle to the end of the book much more impactful, in my opinion. So it's one of those where I'd say you gotta push through the beginning, but it's worth it. Ultimately, I gave this 4 stars. I thought it was really, really good. It's much darker than you'd expect. I buddy read this with my friend from high school, and she didn't like it as much as I did. She thought it was a little bit too dark and a little bit too messed up, so keep that in mind. I enjoyed it much more. Once you really know what's going on in this book, it's good. And I also left the book with kind of a theory about what I thought happened. and it kind of has that aspect of like what actually happened. Like it's kind of up to the reader, I guess, to kind of interpret what happened at the end of this book, and I thought that was really thought-provoking, really cool. There's also some commentary in this book about like consumerism, and I think some like social commentary as well, so that was just really interesting. I'd say that this was like a very thought-provoking book, and it was really good. Ultimately, I don't think it's a 5-star book for me, especially because the beginning was kind of hard to get through, but again, it's a 4-star. Really enjoyed it, highly recommend it. You should read it. Next, I read The Last Housewife by Ashley Winstead. And if you don't know, Ashley Winstead wrote In My Dreams I Hold a Knife, which is probably one of my favorite thrillers ever. I read that last month, I think. And I immediately put another Ashley Winstead book on my holds list at my library, and this one came through. I actually initially thought that this was a like backlist book, but I guess this actually came out really, really recently. Alright, there probably was a slight angle change, and I apologize for that. I had to stop filming because my neighbor was right outside my window, but we are back. I think what I was saying was that I was surprised that this book by Ashley Winstead was actually a new release, not a book from her backlist. So this book actually came out in August 2022, so it is brand new. I had no idea, but this book follows Shay Evans. And Shay, when she was in college, made 2 really good friends, Clementine and Heather. And the 3 of them met this man, and they became obsessed with him, and he basically formed this cult, which they were a part of in college. And it was psychologically, physically, sexually abusive in every way. And their senior year, Clementine actually took her own life. And Heather and Shay managed to escape this cult, and the book starts 8 years later. So Shay has moved away and she's kind of made this life for herself, but she spends a lot of time listening to this very popular true crime podcast that's actually hosted by one of her like childhood friends and somebody that she was close to up until college. And that friend starts this podcast episode and starts talking about Clementine and Clementine's suicide, and begins to also talk about Heather, and evidently Heather has recently also completed suicide. So our main character is kind of dealing with the fact that her 2 kind of college best friends have both completed suicide, and the podcast host goes on to explain that he thinks that these were murders, not suicides. So Shay travels back to her college to kind of team up with this podcast host to try to figure out what happened to Clementine and Heather. I like to go into my thrillers blind, and this one I went into completely blind, and I thought it was going to be like a domestic thriller about a housewife, and it was not that at all. And this book was very intense. Very, very, very intense. Lots of culty stuff going on, lots of abuse, lots of trigger warnings. Like, please, please, please check the trigger warnings on this one. I was just really surprised about how this book played out, but that was kind of my own fault. But with that said, I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was a little long. But ultimately, like, I was really invested in the story. I really wanted to know what was going on. And the culty stuff did leave me feeling very uneasy, but that's kind of like the point. So in the end, I gave this 4 stars. I did really enjoy it. I preferred In My Dreams I Hold a Knife, but this was a very, very good thriller. I definitely would recommend it if you're in the right headspace for it. Again, it is very, very intense, but it's a great thriller. Highly recommend it. The next book I read was a big change in tone from that, and that was Heartstopper Volume 3 by Alice Oseman. I put all of these books on hold as ebooks at my library, and I've just been reading them as they come in because they are books that you can read in one sitting. I read them in about an hour if I just sit down and read them. There aren't a lot of words on the page. They're graphic novels. I should have mentioned that. So if you don't know, the Heartstopper series by Alice Oseman follows Nick and Charlie, who are high school students who kind of meet and basically fall in love. Charlie is out and Nick is not, and it's just kind of their story. And it's really cute. Highly recommend it. Again, you can read the books in like an hour each, so it's very low commitment, very cute, very heartwarming. I love it. So Heartstopper Volume 3 follows more of Nick's story, and it really focuses on Nick's kind of coming out and his kind of journey with coming out, and also his journey of like coming out as Charlie's boyfriend. It was really cute. It was really well done. In this one, they go to Paris and there's like a trip aspect to it, which is kind of cute. The teachers are really cute. Like, everything's cute. It's just, this series is great. I highly recommend it. It's very hard to talk about because they're like very short and there aren't like a lot of words on the page, but these are just so heartwarming. They're beautiful. I love them. I ended up liking this one a little bit more than Volume 2, and I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars. Just as a recap, I gave the first one 5 stars and the second one 4 stars. Obviously, very high ratings for all of them. Highly recommend them. Please check them out. The next book I finished is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. This is an adult contemporary that follows Sam and Sadie, who are friends who met in childhood, and it kind of follows them chronologically over, I want to say like 25, 30 years. And it's about their friendship and also about kind of their careers as video game creators. So Sam and Sadie kind of have a falling out as children, but they reunite in kind of early adulthood, I guess, kind of early college years, and they kind of team up to create this video game. And as they're creating this video game and it has some like initial success, they drop out of school and finish the game and become like full-time video game creators. And their first video game sees a lot of success, but also creates some strife in their friendship as they're like full-time co-workers, full-time kind of creative video game designers. So obviously this book follows them over a very, very long period of time, and it really, there is like a video game aspect to it, but it really, I think, focuses on friendship and relationships and kind of those friends in your life that have been around for so long that they're more than friends, like they're family, I guess. This book made me cry, actually, a couple of times. I wouldn't say it full-on made me cry, but it made me tear up in multiple places. And I think that Gabrielle Zevin did a really good job of, at the times when she's describing video games, makes you actually feel like you're playing the video game. There are chapters in here that are straight up a video game, and it really feels like you're in that world, like you're playing that game, and I think that that was done in a very masterful way. And as a person who enjoys video games, like I just really, really enjoyed this book. Similar to The Last Housewife, I thought this was a little bit too long. Like, there were some parts that I felt like could have been omitted and the story would have been just as good and maybe a little bit more enjoyable for me. But ultimately, I gave this 4 stars. I really, really enjoyed it. Like I said earlier, I feel like I gave everything 4 stars this month, but they were 4-star books. Like, they really were. So this was really good. I would highly recommend it. If you're a fan of video games, definitely pick this up. If you're a fan of kind of emotional adult contemporaries, I would pick this up. It was great. It was really, really good. Highly recommend. The next book I finished in September is part of my vlog, so I'm going to summarize it, but I'm not going to tell you my opinions on it, and that was Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. This book follows Elizabeth Zott, who is a female chemist in the 1950s. And at the beginning of this book, we find out that later in her life, Elizabeth Zott becomes kind of the star of this very successful cooking show, and that she's a single mother. And then we rewind back to her kind of as this struggling chemist who has absolutely no interest in having children, and we kind of work our way toward this future. So throughout this book, we're kind of trying to figure out how Elizabeth got from point A to point B. That's it. That's all I'm going to tell you about it. You'll see. I really want to say more things, but I'm not going to. My vlog should be the next video that comes out after this one, so stay tuned for that. Next, I read Cleopatra and Frankenstein by Coco Mellers. I've been saying Coco Malors for many, many, many videos, but the audiobook narrator says Mellors. This book is an adult contemporary that follows Cleo and Frank, who meet at the beginning of this book and fall in love. Cleo is 25 and she's this kind of like free-spirited artist type. And Frank is in his 40s and he works in advertising. And the two fall in love very quickly, get married very, very quickly. And this book, I wouldn't say has like a real plot, but it kind of follows Cleo and Frank's perspective as well as various perspectives of people who are connected to Cleo and Frank as a couple, so like family and friends mostly. And it kind of follows all of those people and how Cleo and Frank's kind of tumultuous relationship affects all of these people. And it's told chronologically, which I really appreciated. I think if it wasn't, I probably wouldn't have enjoyed this as much. But it's told chronologically, and we follow all these people as we learn kind of the dysfunctional side of Cleo and Frank's relationship. This book, like, I was interested the whole time. I never considered DNFing it. And I was pretty attached to a lot of the characters, actually. Usually books without, like, really clear plots are not really for me, and this is definitely, like, a character-driven book. But I enjoyed it. Like, ultimately, I did like it. I wouldn't give it a 4-star. It's not quite a 4-star for me. I ended up settling on a 3.5 for this one. I would recommend it to some people if you like character-driven books. This probably is something that you'd enjoy. There are trigger warnings for this one, including suicide and self-harm and drug use and cheating. There are probably more, but those are the ones that I can think of right now. So keep that in mind. But ultimately, I enjoyed this. If it sounds like something that you'd like, I'd definitely pick it up. I liked it more than most books that are similar to this. That's what I'll say. 3.5 in the end. The next two things that I read were also part of my vlog, so again, I'm not going to talk about them super extensively, but I will tell you what they're about. So I read The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe, which is a short story, and I also read What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher, which is a retelling of the Edgar Allan Poe story, and they largely have the same plot. So I'm going to talk about both of them at once. They both follow our main character, who gets a letter from one of the ushers saying that they're very, very ill. So our main character goes to their kind of crumbling, creepy, spooky, gloomy house and basically discovers that the two remaining members of the Usher family, Roderick and Madeline, who are twins, are very, very sick and are both clearly dying. And our main character kind of stays at the house, which is a very gloomy, depressing place. Can't emphasize that enough. And basically, the ushers become more and more and more erratic, and then major events happen at the end, which I can't spoil for you because it would spoil the entire story, but it is like a gothic horror story. That is all I can tell you for now. Again, vlog coming soon. The very last book that I read in September was A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. This book is a YA thriller and a booktube darling, and I'm so glad I finally got to it. I listened to this and I would recommend it as an audiobook. It was pretty good as an audiobook. But this book follows Pip, who is a high school senior, and she has to do this kind of capstone project in order to graduate. And as her capstone project, she chooses to investigate this murder that occurred in her town, and it was a murder of a high school student named Andy Bell, and the supposed perpetrator of this crime died also, so the town has kind of recovered from this and accepted what they believe happened, but Pip believes that the alleged perpetrator was innocent and kind of decides that she's going to prove his innocence through her capstone project. Basically, this book is Pip investigating this murder that occurred 5 years ago in her town. I had some issues with this book. I did really enjoy the investigation and I did want to know what actually happened, so I was invested in the book in that way. But there were also aspects of the book that really took me out of the story pretty consistently. The first of which is just that, like, this capstone project was so inappropriate. And she did kind of lie to her school about what exactly her capstone project was about, but she did tell the school that it had to do with this murder, and I still felt like that was so inappropriate. And it seemed like nobody was like, this is inappropriate, which was weird to me. Pip also interviews people and kind of behaves like a trained crime investigator, which, I mean, she's a teenager. Like, she was so professional, it was like kind of unrealistic. And at the same time, she was also doing things that were so incredibly illegal. Like, she broke into a house for evidence, and she, like, lied to people to get information. And she kept saying things like, I need this evidence to take to the police. And I was like, honey, this evidence is useless because you obtained it illegally. Like, no. So, yeah. So, I mean, I enjoyed it. It was a fun read, but ultimately I'd say it was kind of just okay. I gave it 3 stars. Sorry to everyone who absolutely loves this book. It just didn't quite do it for me. I did enjoy it. I never considered DNFing it. It was fun. Like, if you're looking for a fun, not super, like, serious, I guess, book, it does deal with serious topics, but ultimately, because of the things I already described, I didn't take it that seriously, I guess. There you go. 3-star book. I'm glad I read it. I don't think I'll continue this series, but if the next books are amazing, let me know. Maybe I will, and that's that. So that is it for the books that I read in September. I'm sorry that this wasn't like a complete wrap-up because of the vlog. I had hoped to get the vlog out before this wrap-up, but it didn't happen. So before I leave you, I will tell you about the books that I'm currently in the middle of, like I normally do. So I've started In the Quick by Kate Hope Day, as well as Chouette by Claire Oshetsky, and I'm really excited to talk to you about both of those in my next wrap-up, so stay tuned. That is it for my September wrap-up. If you're new to my channel, please consider liking this video and subscribing. I put 1 bookish video out every week, sometimes 2, if I can pull it off. If you're still here, thank you so much for being here. I always really appreciate it, and I will see you next time.